All right. So thanks for that amazing introduction, and thank you all for welcoming me right into this space. Super excited to be here. So I am Josh Rodgers. I am my former title was the Beloved Community Volunteer Engagement Manager. Um, my new title is Manager of Equitable Community Engagement. So a part of that is I'll still be managing the Beloved Community Volunteer Engagement Program. But this kind of restructuring of the work allows that work to expand in ways where we're thinking about implementing the Beloved Community. We're not thinking about it. We are implementing the Beloved Community globally and figuring out how we can assist our area offices as well with this work. And then also, it takes us deeper into some community engagement work. One of the things, and I'll talk about a little bit later, that we found out in going through building out this program is that there were some disconnects and some real needs in how affiliates are connecting with the neighborhoods that they serve, which ultimately impacts the type of volunteers, the number of volunteers, the retention of volunteers, right? And how we can leverage the success of our volunteer programs to also be um, community connectors is what I'm calling them. So I have a presentation that I want to share. And we'll do that. All right, can everyone see my screen? If you can just do a thumbs up or something, then we can go ahead. Okay, perfect. All right. So, beloved community, volunteer engagement, as I said, is the program that we lead, and it was based on one of the last living concepts from Dr. King. So we know he had Dr. King was a man who pushed and advocated for equity. So one of the last things that he worked on before his untimely assassination was the passing of the Fair Housing Act. And a part of that was thinking through what does real community look like when we actually have fair housing, right? So not just having fair housing so everyone can have access to it. That is critically important to our work at Habitat, and right, also something that we push, but also how do we create neighborhoods and spaces that are just as inclusive as this particular act or bill should have been. So this was a part of his work. So this was actually created in 2018 on the HFHI level as a communications initiative. Going back to that point, one of Dr. King's final pieces of work was advocating for the Fair Housing Act. In 2018, the King Center partnered with or came to Habitat International and wanted to do a collaborative celebration that was centered around the 50th anniversary. So the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's assassination was also the same year of the 50th anniversary of the passage of the Fair Housing Act. So a part of the work, or the collaboration rather, that we agreed to at that time, and little known fact, so Natasha Reed Rice is HFHI's global DEI officer. At the time in 2018, I was the paralegal that supported her when she was an attorney. So we've been working together for quite a while. So at that time, when we were working with the King Center, that was what we wanted to do. We wanted to figure out how did that work in a habitat context. So we created, if you go to habitat.org and go to the beloved community, you'll see a bunch of information about what Living the Beloved Community is. You will see a pledge that affiliates can take to commit to this equity focused work. And that's kind of pretty much what it was at the time. It was a communications initiative to celebrate those two historic moments. And we kind of left it up to affiliates to take the pledge on their own, to be independent actors in that, but also represent what the beloved community meant in whatever way that best fits their specific context. So many affiliates, right, did what they call beloved community bills. It essentially did some intentional recruiting with local organizations and had those individuals on a build site together. Some affiliates who do not build as often, right, really did some advocacy work around what equity how equity focused program around housing looked like. New York was one of the examples who did a lot of deep advocacy work around that. We had some affiliates who did some really deep faith engagement work, right? When you think about beloved community, you think about Dr. King and his roots with the church. A lot of affiliates took on that approach. So it was kind of all over the place. There was really no real structure. And after that initial year, we just kind of let it be what it was. It was not anything that we pushed forward anymore. Fast forward to 2020, right? We're in the midst of a pandemic. We had the unfortunate murder of George Floyd. A lot of companies reacted with instituting diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. The beautiful thing about Habitat is while our DEI program was also birthed during that season, it is something that we have been deeply committed to going all the way back to our Koinonia roots, right? We've always been engaged in this kind of deep social justice, civil rights, equity focused work as a part of our programming, but we had an official department established during that time. And one of the first roles that was created was the role that I sit in, and it was building the beloved community through volunteer engagement. So when I started in 2021, we looked at where we are, right? This is where we're right here on this slide talking about the challenges. We looked at where we were in our country, the polarization around marginalized groups, the impact that certain policies and societal perspectives had on these groups, and how it could ultimately impact, we've seen it, right? How it impacts access to housing in many ways, but not just that, how it impacts our perception and our reputation, and then even our ability to act and to move within communities is where, and that's where our volunteers come in the most, right? They are on the ground advocates, our ambassadors. So this is the challenge that we were looking at and trying to figure out why this program was so important. So deep initially into building out the program, I am a guy of numbers. When I was taking stats in my grad school program, I was like, I'm never going to use this kind of stuff. And actually, I use it quite a bit, right? So data tells us quite a bit of stories about how we can create programs, strategies, solutions that we can implement. And one thing that we found when we did our affiliate satisfaction survey back in 2021 to kind of inform our 2022 goals was that we had 119 affiliates who responded that stated that they needed funding for programs that supported DE&I. And then an additional 158 affiliates said that they wanted more clarity before even beginning. And I understand it. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is a touchy subject in some cases. In other cases, I like to call it the popular person at the high school lunch table, right? Everybody wants to talk about it. Everybody wants to connect to it. But I also understand the hesitation of not wanting to get it wrong, right? Or having a deeper understanding about what some of these concepts mean, how we can implement them, how do we navigate what can become, right, tense environments and ecosystems. So there was just a lot of questions. So we had that. So one of the ways that we do it is, right, to fundraise around it, to see what kind of resources can we put out there. How can we support affiliates in a way that creates programming that allows us to see case studies and kind of better learn how this work can be implemented in the field. I will be one of the ones that will completely advocate from the HFHI level that we can create the strategy, the templates, and the tools. And I think all that kind of stuff is great. We have some of the subject matter expertise, but it is our local affiliates who are implementing this work. So for me, it was critically important that that funding was focused on the affiliated network and how we can apply this in real time and then build upon things that we can transfer across the network and then grow, because DEI is a journey. So what can be real progress today can be regression tomorrow. So there needs to be a continual commitment to learning and growing. And that is what's critically important for this kind of funding concept around where we are. So kind of talked about that. This was our approach, birthed from Dr. King, rooted in our roots there at Koinonia Farm. I won't go through all of that. But this is how it is structured within the organization, right? So we have our DEI program that is there. And then these are some of our internal departments, our international program strategy, again, that talks about how we implement this work in our ASOs with our offices right outside of the US context. And then some of our enabling initiatives that really talks about our internal HR practices, the DEI stuff that we need to work on at Habitat as well, right? We have our own set of challenges that we're working through and want to be better at. But in terms of programming and how we support the network, that pillar is called building the beloved community, right? So as you see, we have some advancing equity-focused advocacy from our GRA team, advancing Black home ownership. I'm sure some of you are familiar or heard about that program. Beloved community volunteer engagement, that's what we're talking about today. Neighboring movements and thriving communities. We have some partnerships that are in the works that's going to get that initiative started. And then there's some intersections in the work that I'm doing. And then our courageous conversations. The first time we had one was at affiliate conference almost 2 years ago. So we had a conversation with some leaders from Wells Fargo and just understanding how we navigate some some of these equity-focused programs, specifically as it relates to housing finance. So those conversations can be a range of topics, but that was the most recent full-scale example, and we are working to implement that as a fully built-out program as well. So that's what building a beloved community as a pillar is, but today's focus is on how that relates to volunteer engagement and its impact on our work. So at its core, beloved community volunteer engagements is meant to recruit, retain, and mobilize diverse populations of volunteers, right? So a diverse volunteer population or pipeline leads to an enriched volunteer experience. There is tons of data that suggests when you have more diversity within organizations, the people who are part of it have a more enriched experience. But not only that, there are so many other ideas that are able to be birthed at the table and strategies that can be influenced by diversity. And when we talk about diversity, we're not just talking about racially focused diversity, right? Race and ethnicity. I understand that in the United States, a lot of times our entry point into diversity is race and ethnicity, but there are so many different intersections to that, right? So there's gender, there's age, there's socioeconomic status, there are identities, right? That all intersect with race, and we look at all of that when we talk about diversity. And then just thinking about the lived experience. So even when you find more homogenous groups, there is no monolith, right? When you think about more homogenous groups, no matter what level of demography you're looking at, that experience can be very different across the United States. So I'm from Memphis, Tennessee originally, and a lot of things culturally that I was used to while it's still the South was very different when I moved to Atlanta, Georgia. And I was just telling Crystal and Lindsay before we got on that I was spent some time in California this summer doing some site visits, and the culture, right, was very different. Some of their approaches, even to the work, was very different. So when you have diversity and you look at it from a holistic view, we can think about how all these different experiences, identities, and perspectives can help enrich our experiences, not just at the volunteer level, but at the organizational level. So from there, I found very quickly, very quickly, that recruiting diverse volunteers is actually the easiest part of this work. And I know some of you may be thinking, I have challenges recruiting diverse volunteers. So how on earth is he saying that's easy? The reason why I'm saying that is because without knowing any of your challenges, I can almost spitball about 5 ideas right now of how you can increase diversity. And one of them is through community partnership, right? So if you have, well, there aren't many HBCUs on the West Coast, but there are several college organizations that have a number, right, of cultural clubs right there, right? So building partnership, and I'm not saying it's going to be easy to build them, but like knowing the steps and knowing where to go is the easy part, right? Having conversations with those clubs and organizations, fostering conversations and relationships with those universities can give you access to those diverse groups, right? Local churches within your neighborhood, other organizations who have similar goals to see the neighborhoods that we serve and the areas that we serve, to see them propel and move forward as well, right? Thinking about ways that of alignment with some of these organizations. These are the ways in which, right, diversity can be attainable. Now, how you foster those relationships may be the difficult nuance of that, but starting those conversations is the easy part. Sending the email, going to the community meeting, going to campus, making a phone call, right? These are all the type of things that can be done pretty quickly without a huge strategy around it. It just takes a little bit of effort, some intentionality, and some people with capacity to be able to do it. So the recruiting part, we figured out that we can work with affiliates to do that, right? We can understand where they are geographically, we can understand what's around them and create a pretty quick and simple plan for having diversity at the recruiting level. It is the retention and the mobilization that's the harder part, right? Because then we start to think through cultural competencies. So as you'll see in a later slide, there are quite a few affiliates. We have an affiliate input group, and one of the things that they talked through was some of the challenges that they were facing with diverse volunteers. So it made me ask the question, are we ready, even as an entire network, are we prepared culturally to be able to handle the diversity that we say that we're seeking, right? I tell this story not for a pity party, but because it's just my truth. When my first experience with Habitat was at a affiliate in the South. I was a college student at the time. I went to an HBCU. So there were 2 groups of students, an HBCU group and a predominantly white institution. They brought a group of students as well. And when we got there, we got our assignments, and immediately, all of the students that I was with, my group, we went into the crawl space. Now, originally, we didn't think nothing of it, but then they told us that we would be installing insulation in a crawl space. Now, I am not handy at all, right? But something in me knew that this wasn't right. And I actually had an uncle who was a contractor. So I like stepped out real quick and called him and asked him a few questions. And the first thing was like, why are you wasting insulation in a crawl space? That's not a livable space. Typically, they're not insulated. So I was just like, I don't know. I'm just following what the construction manager told me to do. When I go back upstairs, the only glaring thing for me was that all the white students were in the house painting and doing things at the top, and we were at the bottom in a crawl space doing a job that seemed right to just kind of get us out of the way because it really didn't make sense to the building of this home. That was a very negative experience. Now, when it was over, they got their pictures. You had videos, they had a write-up. It looked like a really great, inclusive, diverse volunteer opportunity, but it wasn't, right? We didn't feel welcomed once we understood or what our assumptions were, right, of what was going on. That did not feel good. And I know that is one example, and it's kind of an extreme one, but there are several examples across the affiliated network of how people who are not a part of the majority, right, that can be at a volunteer site, feel unwelcome, they feel uneasy based on what's going on in a volunteer context. I've been on build sites where I've seen construction managers give jobs to women that were solely domestic, right? Sweep here, organize tools, do these types of things, right? And immediately for some may not catch it, but for others, like, I could do more than sweep. I live in a new build community. There are women building homes all around me, doing a job that I, for a fact, could not do, right? So just with that knowledge alone, and not even seeing that example, I know for a fact that many different people have many different skill sets. So an easy way to fix that is to ask people, and I know this happens a lot too, what is it that you want to do? How is it that you want to serve on this build site, right? It's a quick and easy way, but sometimes those things are not asked. Why? Because we have biases. And that's where the cultural competency piece is. So if I took you through an exercise to figure out what kind of diversity are you looking for? And the reason why I say that is because there are affiliates who are in service areas with really high specific population. So if you have a very high Hispanic population, then oftentimes your recruiting may want to be, we want to increase volunteers from the Latinx or Hispanic community, right? So whatever that plan of action is or your why behind it, we don't want to do all of that work and then we get them to a volunteer opportunity, whether it's advocacy, a build site, or whatever skilled volunteering that is. And it is not a culture that supports that type of diversity. Microaggressions, asking questions based on cultural stereotypes, right? These kind of things happen, and it further separates us sometimes from the communities that we serve in, because just as I told that story, and I usually don't say the affiliate name, and I won't now either, I'm not the only person who's been out loud and outspoken about that experience. So now, right, I understand that affiliate has been in this space, has done a much better job in terms of how they're dealing with volunteers. However, right, everybody don't have the story that says they went back and now they're hired, right, by Habitat International. How did you get back here, right? I don't know. But I am here. So we want to make sure that's why the community engagement piece is important as well, because how we deal with our volunteers, the kind of cultures and the environments and the ecosystems that we create are really critical to the future of our community collaborations, how people see us, right? What kind of homeowners are they even hesitant to want to partner with us because they have a tainted understanding of who we are? So the retention and the mobilization piece are the things that we are critically working through in terms of a lot more effort. So how do we engage them? The language that we use with volunteers, making sure that there are people, subject matter experts in certain spaces. I am not a woman, right? So while I can talk about gender equity, there are some specific things that I have thought partners on, other women who I go to and ask questions when it pertains to gender equity issues, right? Because I want to make sure that we're not just throwing things out there because I think it makes sense. I have an amazing mom. I have two sisters. So I think I have an experience, a perspective, but I don't have the lived experience, the perspective. And I'm also not leaning on one experience and one perspective, right? I'm getting diverse thoughts. So that is just how we look at the recruiting, the retention, and the mobilization piece of building the beloved community through volunteer engagement. So here are some of the aims. I won't read all of them word for word, but what we understand is that having a more diverse volunteer corps can also help us increase the number of units and the diversity among the families that partner with us. Representation is critically important. I've said with affiliates who've talked to marginalized groups who said that, oh, we've wanted to, be a part and apply for a Habitat home. We didn't think Habitat was for us, right? And that's because they didn't see representation sometimes in the staff level, which we can't always control, but also not at the volunteer level. There was no one who looked like them, who had their lived experience, right? So they didn't think it was a program for them. It is an assumption, sure, but it is their reality. So when we increase diversity in one area, we increase the opportunity for us to go further in the type and the number of homes that we're building, because we also open up our when we do it genuinely, we open up the opportunity for additional funding as well. Increasing youth engagement, you got to be real honest, y'all. Our volunteer corps is a certain age, right? And eventually, they're going to age out, whatever that looks like, right? Based on life, health, all these different types of things. We want to make sure that we're engaging younger volunteers now, so that we can keep them within our pipeline. We can make sure they understand our mission, and they can go through a certain life cycle with their affiliate as well. One of the additional aims is increasing local partnerships. I kind of talked about that just previously. Who are the organizations who are already doing really great work? How can we partner with them to make sure that the neighborhoods that we serve are being uplifted and moving forward? We do a really, 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 really great job at affordable housing, but that is our work, right? And sometimes that extends into some other things, right? We do neighborhood revitalization work. Some of you are a part of that. I know internationally we talk about water, hygiene, sanitation, all those different types of things. So we're looking at how the neighborhoods holistically can be better, but some of the things that we don't work on is like education, right? Finance outside of some of the courses maybe the homeowners are taking, health equity, all these different types of things. But there are other organizations who are doing it. How can we partner with them so that we can provide a holistic experience to our affiliates? Not that we want to do the work, but we also want to make sure that our homeowners, future and present, have access to these resources, because again, we're building a beloved community. We want to make sure that there is access to resources to improve their overall quality of life. And that is deeper, right, than just home ownership, right? That is a holistic experience. The two things that we're doing this here is deliver trainings, templates, and tools. So we have some that are already created. We have some that are in the work. And as this work continues to evolve, we want to make sure that we have resources that are up to date, that are valuable. We don't want to just throw out, like in 2018, well, I thought it was a great initiative. We don't want to just throw out things to say, hey, we're doing this for the sake of doing it. We put this together, run with it. We want to be very intentional that the resources that we're building, the tools and the strategies that we're putting out are informed, right, by the things that you feel like you need, the challenges that you say that you're facing, and whether that means we need to partner with a third-party consultant because we don't know it all, I'll admit it. That means that we have to do that to make sure that we're giving you quality and substantive resources to move forward. This kind of speaks to just some of what we're doing in action. So as of today, we actually have about 50 affiliates who are part of the affiliate input group. And I'll just throw this plug out there. If you want to be a part, you can join us every second Monday. We have 2 calls on that time, one at 11 and one at 3. Those are Eastern times. And I understand that people are on different time zones, so the 3 o'clock probably work better for this entire group. But if you're interested in being a part of that, I'll share my email, and you can just send me an email saying you're interested, and I'll forward you and add you to the invitation. But in that group, it is a community of practice. We share challenges, we share successes, affiliates share even resources that they're using to increase diversity, to talk about community engagement, and talk about community partnerships. We have different presentations similar to this one from other groups who are doing equity-focused work, and talk about, and that's the other thing, we talk about the intersection of these programs and volunteerism. And that is the nuance that I really love. So we talk about even advancing Black home ownership, how increasing Black volunteers can increase Black home ownership applications, right? So we talk about all the intersections of the work and how you can even think about it, right, at your local level, and how you can leverage your volunteer program to support other programs that could be happening. So right now, I mentioned that we have 2 resources that are available. There is a language guide, and I'll make sure Lindsay and Crystal have the link. So we send this out, you'll have access to all these things. And a 2-part training series that does a pretty deep dive into DEI and B, which is belonging. And then the second part of that is really how that specifically correlates with your volunteer program. Things that we're working on based on what we've heard from affiliates is a toolkit, right, to explain why we need DEI, committees that are focused on DEI, that relates to volunteerism. I say it in a few other presentations that I've done, that it is great to have a DEI statement and strategy. It is also great to have a nuanced strategy that specifically focuses on volunteer and community engagement. So that is one specifically that we're working on. Going back to that same thing, a statement for persons of color, BIPOC populations, a 10-point best practice list for engaging diverse groups, and then templates that are around thematic bills. So MLK Day, learn and build type situations, community conversations, and one that is actually in the pipeline now that came from the last cohort of affiliate group members is a trained 2-part series, videos on demand series. It's going to be focused on decentering the charity mindset. So I know a lot of times in volunteerism, especially with our corporate bills, they come, they do one big bill, right? They pay a ton to be there, and then they've met their corporate responsibility goals. But like, did it really advance our mission? In a way, yeah. Like we got some work done, but they, I think, benefited the most. This training will recenter that, less focus on celebrating them and them taking an off day, right, and getting some photos, and more about connecting them to the mission and the community. So we do want to celebrate our volunteers, so we thank them for the work that they're doing, but at the same time, they should be volunteering because they're so connected to the work, and not it be a political ploy or kind of performative idea. And we want to make sure that we're honing in on that in our work as well. We want to make sure that our homeowners, those communities, they have a sense of pride. That pride is honored, right? So one way to do that is connect people to the mission and connect people to those communities in intentional ways. So the Beloved Community Action, the way that some affiliates are going about this is through rethinking what bills look like, right? So even when you have corporate partners, let's just use Wells Fargo as an example. If they came to you and said, hey, we want to do a corporate bill, one of the things that you could possibly ask them for is like, what does engagement look like post this bill day, right? Are they willing to do financial classes once a month for 3 months for homeowners, right? Are they willing to, lead a lunch and learn to talk about maybe some best practices from savings once you become a homeowner, right? These are kind of things that I don't think are hard asks, right? But it does allow that partner to be more deeply and intentionally engaged with the community, right? Decentering the charity mindset. We gave y'all $15,000 to come build. That should be enough. And it's great. We're thankful. But what are some ways in which we can make sure that connection stays there and build real relationship? Beloved Community Bills is a way that we make room for community members. So even on a corporate bill, again, an ask could be like, we want to make sure that the community is involved. Is it okay that 10% of our slots go to community members, right? Or just having a day on a Saturday or Friday where most people are off or have more flexibility to say this day is dedicated to community members at large. We want to make sure we're bringing people in. Again, take ownership of this community. We want to see it built up, and part of my ownership is making sure that I'm doing my part with this one home, this second home, this block of homes, right? Whatever that looks like. And even bringing in, doing the intentional bridge building work with diverse organizations and groups. So whether there's a Christian church and a mosque, right, and bringing them together to talk about that, you probably have more light than you don't, right, and bringing them together to do a build and have intentional assignments, build assignments where they're working together and programming around lunch that facilitates conversations. Because one thing that we learn and research also supports is that certain people from certain organizations, backgrounds, and perspectives would have never had a conversation with each other except for the fact that they were forced to serve together, right? So intentionally building that bridge, right, is what these Beloved Community Bills are, kind of helps facilitate navigating those differences and really understanding that, breaking down stereotypes and demystifying things about people and communities that likely were not true, and just learning about the humanity of a person, regardless of all the other stuff, right? We can do that in intentional ways, and we have resources that talk about the language resource, talk about how we navigate difficult conversations without being offensive, right? And polarizing. There's definitely ways to do that. And then the last thing where we've seen most of the results from is through our affiliate grants. So we did do 2 grants, the Beloved Community Dream Grant, very, very, very vague when we say create new and innovative ways. And the reason why we left it like that is for all the reasons that I just explained. DEI is a journey. It looks very different from space to space and place to place. So we didn't want to put stringent guidelines on what that could be. Now, there were some objectives that we wanted to see, right? Increased diversity, number of volunteers engaged, an idea that was bigger than, while we appreciate the MLK Day bills, something beyond that, right? Like that's not an award-winning grant application. I'll just be honest. So what is there around some of these cultural activation? Maybe it's around Hispanic Heritage Month. Maybe it's around Women's History Month. Maybe it's around, speaking of, I'll call them out, New York did some cultural immersions, virtual learnings during the holiday season where they focused on Christmas, Hanukkah, and Kwanzaa, right? And they just talked about the why of it all and brought in community members to begin to explain why they celebrate it. And that was just a way to better understand different cultures, right? It wasn't necessarily about volunteerism, but what it did do for those who would engage with Habitat New York beyond that moment, they had a greater understanding of different communities, right? So those are the kind of things we talk about with the Dream Grant, really innovative ways for that to happen. And just as a plug, we are going to announce the application around MLK Day 24, and the application will go out in February. So please want to look out for all the HFHI newsletters. I'm going to try to put them in as many as possible so that we can get application interest for that. Those grants will be $50,000 a piece. So yeah, really, really, really great opportunity to do some amazing things within your network. And then the education grant is one that is just what it says. People wanted to start their journey or deeper understanding around their DEI journey. So it is a grant, smaller amounts, but it is for affiliates to have third-party consultants to engage in different type of trainings and exercises that advances their work in DEI, and then make sure they have an intentional tie to that as it relates to volunteer engagement. So this is just one of the ways that this work connects globally based on the United Nations Sustainability and Development Goals. So gender equality, reduced inequalities across the world, sustainable cities and communities, peace, justice, strong institutions, and partnerships for those goals. So again, we're thinking about this from a global perspective and using and leveraging experiences from all different spaces to build upon how we can support people everywhere. And again, I'll make sure we share these links so that you have them. So this is where you can find all of our resources. This is where you can see some of the success stories to provide some examples and maybe spark some creativity around how you want to approach the work. But yes, I'll make sure all these are shared with the PDF version of this slide deck as well. And then that's it for me. So I'm going to stop sharing here, and then definitely open the floor for questions, comments, concerns, anything. I'm definitely open to answering.